Anna Hyatt Huntington was an internationally known sculptress whose specialty was animal and garden sculpture. Let's learn more about this remarkable lady whose generosity has left a lasting impact on the state of South Carolina. Huntington was born in Cambridge, Massachusetts on March 10, 1876. Her father, a professor of paleontology and zoology, encouraged his daughter to develop her artistic talents. Her mother was a career artist who specialized in landscape watercolors. She also illustrated her husband's books about ice-aged mammals. Anna's parents nurtured a love of science, art, and nature and encouraged her passion for animals. While in her teens, she had planned to become a professional violinist. Her sister Harriet asked Anna to help her complete a sculpture of a boy with a dog. Harriet worked on the human figure and Anna on the animal. Once their sculpture was exhibited and then sold, Anna's path began to lead her away from music and toward sculpture. In 1902, Huntington moved to New York City to pursue her career. She studied and collaborated with several artists, but Anna did not have much formal training. She had learned the skill of scientific observation from field trips with her father. Anna was said to have had a photographic memory. She spent hours at circuses and in zoos learning as much as she could about the animals. Having already built a good reputation for the quality of her animal sculpture, she left New York City for Paris in 1906. While in France, she created an award-winning sculpture of Joan of Arc. Because of this, she was later commissioned to do a statue of Joan of Arc in New York's Riverside Park. This was the first public statue of a woman, as well as the first public statue by a woman in the metropolis. By 1915, she was an established artist in New York, making more than $50,000 a year. In 1921, Anna met Archer Milton Huntington, the founder of the Hispanic Society of America, when he commissioned her to create a medal for the society.
So, give you a little background on Archer Huntington. His father was Collis P. Huntington. He was one of the founders of the Transcontinental Railroad. The very first railroads connect the East and West Coasts together. And not content with that vast family fortune, Archer's father Collis diversified even further into transportation and built the Newport News shipyards. So Archer Huntington actually inherited a vast fortune from his father. And as a young man, Archer spent his life exploring the world. He was especially enamored of Hispanic culture and architecture and literature. So he loved, as a young man, loved traveling along the coast of Spain. There, he was very impressed with Moorish fortresses he had seen.
Archer was a philanthropist who used his inherited wealth to donate land, money, and collections to establish museums, state parks, and nature preserves. Anna and Archer served on a committee in 1922 for the National Sculpture Society. They were married at Anna's New York studio on March 10th, 1929. It was the bride's 47th birthday and the groom's 53rd.
So at the time that Anna and Archer met, Anna was considered the 10th wealthiest self-made woman in the country. Okay, made her own fortune, not talking people who inherited their fortunes from their fathers, like some people we know. She made a vast fortune on her own. Once she married Archer and she had unlimited resources at her disposal, she never sold another piece of sculpture. Every piece was donated.
In 1927, Mrs. Huntington finished her statue of El Cid for the grounds of the Hispanic Society of America on Audubon Terrace in Manhattan, New York. In the same year, she contracted tuberculosis.
So, what brought the Huntingtons to South Carolina originally? Well, interestingly enough, it was actually disease. Anna had been diagnosed with a terrible disease called tuberculosis. And the doctors told Anna and Archer that if there was any hope that Anna was ever going to recover from this terrible disease, they had to find a warmer climate to spend the winter in. So this set the Huntingtons on a journey down the newly built Intracoastal Waterway aboard a borrowed yacht named the Rocinante. So as they were passing through what is now known as the Waccamaw Neck region of South Carolina, they saw an advertisement offering for sale a hunting club. Now, this hunting club was built on the remnants of 4 former rice plantations. So the Huntingtons, they toured the land, they fell in love with it, they purchased it outright, and they decided to, on the beach side of that property, they were going to build their winter home, which became Atalaya.
Atalaya is South Carolina's permanent sandcastle. It was designed by Archer Huntington based on Moorish castles that he saw along the Spanish coast in his travels. It was used as their winter home and doubled as Anna's studio when she was in South Carolina. The word itself means watchtower.
And then on the more inland side of the property, they were going to develop one of South Carolina's very first tourist attractions, Brookgreen Gardens. So they established Brookgreen Gardens as a place dedicated to the conservation and preservation of low country flora and fauna. So it was dedicated to protecting wildlife and plants and ecosystems. It was also dedicated to exhibiting realistic sculpture made by American artists. So Anna was very particular about realistic sculpture. So we were very fortunate. Anna kept a very detailed journal pretty much her entire adult life. So we don't have to wonder what she thought about things. We can just read her journal and figure out. So we know what Anna liked. She loved wildlife, she loved animals, she loved sculpting, loved the arts. She hated modern art with a passion that burned like the sun. So Anna's philosophy was, if you were going to sculpt a horse, when you were done, your piece of art should look like a horse and not an isosceles triangle. And she's very adamant about that. So they developed Brookgreen Gardens as a showcase for that. It's now the largest outdoor sculpture garden in the world.
The remaining land across U.S. Highway 17 from Brookgreen Gardens that stretches to the Atlantic Ocean is now known as Huntington Beach State Park. This is where Atalaya is located. Please listen in as Interpretive Ranger Mike Walker of Huntington Beach State Park explains more about the role of the Huntingtons in the local community.
So it sounds crazy to us nowadays, but what was actually happening is the Huntingtons were trying to employ as many people as possible in the local community. That period, 1931 to 1933, that was in the middle of a very dark period in our nation's history. It was the middle of the Great Depression. And if you lived in this county, if you lived in Georgetown County in the Great Depression and you had a job, that automatically meant that you worked for the Huntingtons. So they were trying to employ as many people as possible. They only employed people from the local area. And in only a couple of rare cases, the Huntingtons, if needed, would bring in skilled craftsmen, usually from Archer's shipyards, to help with the construction. So almost everything was done locally. The only exceptions are the grill work on the windows. Those were designed by Anna herself, and those were manufactured by a company called Tito and Roger in Miami, Florida.
In the 1930s, Anna was very busy with many projects. She planned and began to implement her design for Brookgreen Gardens. She began by placing some of her own statues and later added other works by American sculptors. In 1932, she began doing some castings in aluminum. Before that time, her work was primarily in bronze. To support the war effort during World War II, Mrs. Huntington had her own victory garden where she grew vegetables and canned her own produce. In the 1950s, in addition to her work as an artist, Anna also became a nurse for her ailing husband. However, she was still able to complete many major works. One of those was unveiled on May 15th, 1955. It was known as the Torch Bearers, an aluminum casting. It was given to the people of Spain to symbolize the passing of the torch of Western civilization from age to youth. At the time of its construction, the Torch Bearers was the largest statue in the world, weighing 3,500 pounds. At the end of 1955, tragedy struck as she lost her beloved Archer in December. The 1960s, Mrs. Huntington, a member of the Daughters of the American Revolution, began to combine her love of history with her love of art. She cast statues of several famous Americans. She made one of Abraham Lincoln on horseback that depicts him as a young man reading a book, absorbed in studying as he sits on a horse. She made one of the Revolutionary War heroine Sybil Ludington to commemorate her 1777 ride. She also made a statue based on General Israel Putnam's escape from the British in 1779 when he rode down a cliff at Horseneck Heights in Greenwich, Connecticut. I'm Laura Ledford, the park interpreter at Andrew Jackson State Park, and here we're lucky enough to have one of Mrs. Huntington's last major works, The Boy of the Waxhaws. Shortly before the 200th birthday of President Andrew Jackson, a group of sixth graders wrote a letter to Mrs. Huntington asking that she make a statue honoring the president in the land of his birth. Mrs. Huntington replied almost immediately. She was happy to do it. She did, however, request that the students purchase the granite base for the statue to be placed in Andrew Jackson State Park. She also told the children that she didn't want to do a statue of him as a general. She wanted to remember him as a youth, shortly after the turmoil of the Revolutionary War had ended, as he looked forward to a bright future. As you can see, both Mrs. Huntington and the children did their part. The South Carolina State Park Service is proud to protect and preserve this beautiful and priceless piece of art for the children of South Carolina. Mrs. Huntington's skill is evident as you examine the statue. She was very meticulous and added so many unique details. Anna Hyatt Huntington passed away on October 4th, 1973, and was buried in Woodlawn Cemetery in Bronx, New York. It is very evident that Mrs. Huntington left a legacy that will be remembered for generations to come.